communists.
Of course, because after all, the communist ability will tend to rise in any kind of a society, and able people will tend to play an important role, and many of those people were able.
In this economy, in this country, I'm moving back to economics for a second, we still have farm price supports. That has been something that has been disgraceful to you forever.
Absolutely.
But we now have a trade negotiator trying to do something about it.
Well, I'll tell you.
But he's got a Congress to deal with.
There's been most recently supposedly a success in the Central American trade agreement. I was asked some time ago if I would write
CAFTA.
CAFTA. I would ask some time ago if I would write a letter in support of it. So before I did that, I thought I ought to look at the treaty. And so, fortunately today with internet, it's very easy to do that. I brought up the treaty. I discovered it's 1,000 pages long,
Right.
and every page has exceptions to free trade. It's not a free trade.
And you could give a one-line definition of what free trade is.
Free trade is you can
The absence of any restrictions on trade.
Right. You can buy from whoever you want, and whatever price is mutually agreeable to you. You can sell to whomever you want, whether he's in this country or some other country, at whatever price is mutually agreeable to you.
I want to talk about 3 or 4 ideas other than that, which that's one of the places you have not prevailed in changing the mind about price supports of the world, and America and the world.
About price supports?
No, I mean farm supports. Farm price support.
support.
Farm price support.
We have certainly not prevailed.
Privatization of Social Security, something you've been arguing since Barry Goldwater was running for president.
That's right.
You haven't succeeded in
prevailed.
that.
That's right.
It doesn't look like it's going to succeed in this administration
That's right.
either.
You're illustrating what I say. When I say we've prevailed in the mindset, but not in practice.
Okay, let's continue down the list. You want to see drugs legalized.
That's right.
Still do.
Absolutely.
Treated like alcohol and tobacco.
Right. I think
You know what people I know involved in the world of drugs say? I mean by that, people who are trying to do something about our addiction to drugs, and they say it would lead to the destruction of so much human life that it would be awful.
And what's happening now is leading to the destruction of so much human life that it's awful. How do they justify the United States causing thousands of deaths in Colombia, in Latin America?
Because of our demand for drugs.
Because we cannot enforce our own laws. We have laws against the consumption of drugs, and we can't enforce them. And as long as we don't enforce them, there's going to be an inflow of drugs, and most of it is going to get through. And in the process of doing it, we go to Colombia and kill fields,
right.
Destroy the livelihood of thousands of people. In this country, look at the number of people who are in jail. You know, it seems to me it's disgraceful.
See, if you legalize it, you wouldn't have people going to prison. You'd have much more closer ability to deal with it as a medical issue.
Absolutely.
As we deal with tobacco as a medical issue, or alcoholism as a medical issue.
There's no question that more lives are lost from tobacco than come closer than any of the drugs. Alcohol kills more people a year. If there's a good case for prohibiting the use of what are now called illegal drugs, there's a better case for prohibiting the use of alcohol and tobacco.
Let me talk about that. You were in favor of all kinds of deregulation. Has airline deregulation worked for America?
Yes.
It has.
It's brought fares down. Look, much of the deregulation is best for the low-income people and not for the high-income people. Airlines are less attractive as a way to travel for people, for you and me, but it's more attractive for the great bulk of the people.
Okay. You also were in favor of eliminating progressive taxation.
Yeah.
A kind of flat tax.
Absolutely.
You're still in favor of that?
Absolutely.
That would be better, even though some say the more you make, the more you ought to pay.
Well, you would. Under a flat tax, you pay more.
Because 18% of a million is more than 18% of 500,000.
It certainly is, right. And they don't take account of the fact that it's progressive in name only, that in fact there are so many loopholes in the law, so many ways of getting around it, that very high-income people pay less, a smaller portion of their income than low-income people do.
Let me go to what many people consider your important contribution to, and I assume this is part of why you won the Nobel Prize, you were the recipient of the Nobel Prize, is because you argued and persuasively that monetary policy was central to the economy, to a successful, efficient economy. And you argued something, I remember something called the quantity theory of monetary policy. In fact, you used to have a license plate that said what?
I still do.
You still do. All right. What is it? It's
MV equals P
MV, which is a formula for that.
Money times velocity equals price times output.
Exactly. All right. But is that the central contribution you have made to economic thought?
Well, I have a little. That is part of it. I don't like to judge my own. I like to leave that to other people.
This is from the new federal chairman, said before he was appointed, Ben Bernanke. Friedman's monetary framework has been so influential that in its broad outlines it has nearly become identical with modern monetary theory. It says it right there.
Yeah, I think that's a correct statement.
And that is the principal contribution.
Well, that's a contribution that probably has the most practical effect. But you see, when you talk about a contribution to economic theory, the things I've done in the field of consumption, theory of consumption,
right.
Things I've done about choices under uncertainty. There are various technical things I've done in economics that, from the point of view of economic theory, are probably more important.
You've argued that consumption theory is more important. You think it's the most important thing you've done.
No, not that it's the most important, that it's scientifically the best thing I've done.
Okay. Let me talk about people. I want you to assess people. I mean, someone once said to me, well, if you're 93, you got nothing to worry about.
I've got a hell of a lot to worry about.
Yeah, but not at that. I'm going to mention names and tell me what you think. Tell me what their value is, sum them up. Ronald Reagan.
He was a great man, no question, because he was a man of principle, and he stuck by his principles and lived by his principles. And he was, as a person, of course, he was a charming person. Everybody who knew him loved him. Nobody who could tell stories the way he could tell them.
How important is he to the success of, quote, the conservative movement in America in the last 25 years of the previous century?
He's tremendously important. I think he and Margaret Thatcher, between them, have been the most influential proponents of free markets and free enterprise in the last century.
In the last century, the most. Where is Barry Goldwater?
Well, Barry Goldwater was an original. Barry Goldwater, like Ronald Reagan, was a person of principle, who was willing to stick to principles and not. It was a tragedy that JFK got assassinated, because if it had been Goldwater versus JFK, John F. Kennedy, right. They were good friends. Right. They liked one another. Right. It would have been a good-spirited thing. It would not have been a mean, nasty kind of an election, as it actually was with Johnson.
And who do you think would have won?
I think Kennedy would have won. Yeah. But it would have been a much closer thing. But, Goldwater almost pulled out of the race after Kennedy was assassinated.
I know he did.
And, but I think he was a great man.
Richard Nixon.
One of the smartest people I've ever met. There's no doubt that if you were to judge the presidents by pure IQ, I think Nixon would come at the top. Not very much above Reagan. Reagan had a very high IQ too. He was much maligned by the people who thought he was a movie actor, couldn't be very smart. But Nixon, however, did not have the same was not as principled as he. I used to say that our principles were his prejudices.
Your principles were his prejudices.
That if nothing was at stake, he would go do that. But it only took a low price, a low reward in terms of politics, for him to willing to go above his principles.
You never forgave him for wage and price controls?
Never. No, I never did.
I mean, you thought it was just a sellout of the highest order.
Well, the last time I saw him was not long after wage and price controls, and that was the last time I saw him.
Right after that.
Right after that.
Jimmy Carter.
Well, I never had any contact with Jimmy Carter. I have no competence to judge that.
You admire his post-presidency?
Some parts of it. The house building, yes.
Yeah, the habitat.
The habitat.
All right. But Bill Clinton, President Clinton, who presided over 8 years of economic success.
Yes, he did.
And dramatically reduced the deficit.
Yes.
Left a surplus.
Yes, that's right.
That's a good thing?
Yeah. Let's see what the reason behind it was. The reason behind it was you had a Democrat as a president, and you had Republicans in command, at least of at least one house, and then of both houses,
right.
During his regime, and so you had gridlock, and that's why you had such good fiscal performance.
Because there wasn't that much spending.
Yeah, because they couldn't agree. See, the best thing to hold down spending is to have a Democratic president and a Republican Congress.
I saw someone last night, and I said, I'm going out to see you and George Shultz, and they said, you lucky man. That's what they said to me. Because you two are viewed as men of integrity, and people disagree or agree with your ideas. But you have been strong in your beliefs and have an engaging personality. The one thing that it seems to me you have cared passionately about, and I don't know where it stands, but tell me why you're so committed to vouchers and changing public education.
Well, I'm no more committed to that than I am to 100 other things.
Oh, really not. I mean, I thought that was sort of one of that was the top of your list.
But it's one thing in which I happen to have gotten involved and in which I see some chance of doing something. But I think it's a very important issue because I think the U.S. is suffering greatly from the defects of its educational system. We have a system in which a quarter or more of the youngsters never graduate from high school. We're creating an underclass by the defects of our educational system. And it's not and the reason for those defects, the fundamental reason for those defects, is that we have a government monopoly, that something like 85% of our kids go to government-run schools.
No competition.
No competition. It's a monopoly, and it's a monopoly that's been taken over by the teachers' unions, which have tremendous influence. Probably the strongest political force in the United States today are the teachers' unions. Something like a quarter or so of the delegates to the Democratic presidential nominating convention were members of the.
How many?
I think about nearly a
25%.
It may be a little less than that. I won't say, but a very large fraction. And it's so obvious how you ought to cure it. As after all, what government wants to do, in this case, is a valid function of government, is to promote education. It doesn't want to promote buildings. It doesn't want to promote schools. It wants to promote schooling. Well, if you're going to promote schooling, and you're going to spend money, if you're going to subsidize it, you ought to subsidize the school, not the schools, but the students. Instead, we subsidize schools. Look at it in general. You want to subsidize anything. Do you want to subsidize the producers of that thing or the consumers? If you subsidize the producers,
teachers,
the schools.
Right.
Yeah. Suppose you want to give people food, subsidize food. Do you want to subsidize the grocery stores, or do you want to subsidize the people who are going to eat the food? See, food stamps are a form of voucher.
Right.
But they don't.
You're saying subsidize the people who use the goods.
Absolutely.
So you'd subsidize food stamps, subsidize the people who need the food, buy the food.
No. With the food stamps, you are subsidizing the people who buy the food.
That's what I mean, people who buy the food. Right.
And you're not subsidizing the grocery stores that sell them.
And in choice, you are subsidizing, and in vouchers, you're subsidizing the people who are getting the education, rather than the people who are providing the education.
You should be, but we are, in fact, subsidizing the people who provide the education.